North Andros is in the house. We have some Kiwanians, some guests, and some prospective members in the house. As we begin our interclub meeting, we're going to have our invocation done by DP Melinda from Kiwanis Club of Central Eleuthera.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Yes.
Lovely Father, as we come before you, O God, giving glory, honor, and praise, O God. Lovely Father, I ask right now that you cover the speaker, O God, and whatever he's about to share with us, that we receive, O God. Yes, my Lord.
Thank you, DP Melinda. Amen. You cut out at some points, but thank you for the prayer for this evening. We have a few persons that are not on the call at this time, but if I call you randomly, that's because I love you. I am President Lakeisha of the Kiwanis Club of North Andros. My interclub chair, he's not in as yet. I would have given him some time to try to log in, so he'll be in momentarily. So before we get into our introduction of our speaker, can I ask a question of you? What is the most important piece of equipment you should have on when you come to Kiwanis meeting?
Your pen, your Kiwanis pen.
Oh, there we go. One clap for everyone. I love it. I love it. How many of you didn't know that by show of hands? Let me see who didn't know. But now that we are here, we're gonna forfeit the toast and the objective so that our speaker can get right on with his presentation. My interclub chair is now signing in. Again, I just want to thank the president of Central Eleuthera and Fort Montague and the interclub chair for arranging this meeting this evening. So ICC Ryan McPhee, I saw you sign in.
Just a pleasant good evening to all.
Okay, can you introduce our speaker for this evening? And turn up your mic just a little bit, give us a little more volume.
Yes, certainly, Madam President. Could everybody hear me clearly at this particular time?
Yes, I can.
Thank you so much. Just bear with me. I just got off a flight, so just getting myself organized. But I do hope everybody is doing well this evening. I'm very privileged to introduce the speaker for this evening. This speaker, I've known him for quite some time from a different organization, namely Toastmasters. And he's been a very awesome individual. But tonight, I am glad to introduce him, and I will go into his bio. Tonight's speaker, I would not call his name as yet, even though we know he is. is an internationally certified addiction professional and global master trainer with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. He is the founding president and CEO of the National Lead Institute in the Bahamas and serves as the director of the ISSUP Bahamas National Chapter and co-chair of the ISSUP National Chapters Advisory Committee and the president of the Destiny Group. The speaker today is a dynamic faith-based leader, part-time lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill Campus, Barbados, in the Faculty of Social Sciences, and host of the Reset Radio Talk Show, airing on Dove 103.75 FM, focus on transforming truth and kingdom empowerment. With a strong background in addiction counseling, nonprofit leadership, and justice reform, he has trained professionals across the Caribbean and Latin America in evidence-based prevention and treatment strategies. He is also a passionate advocate for mental health, youth empowerment, and restorative justice, currently serving as Vice President of the Bahamas Mental Health Association. Our speaker's mission is to build strong, resilient communities by integrating public health, justice, and social service responses with spiritual insight and leadership development. I am so thankful for introducing you today. Without further ado, I present to you our speaker for tonight, Troy E. Clarke. Let's receive him as he comes to the virtual lectern.
Thank you very much, Kiwanis and Makfi, and it's good to see you here in a different forum. It's indeed a pleasure, and I thank you very much for your timely introduction. And let me just first start out and just thank your president who invited me, and she is one of our, I would say, one of our astute domestic violence certified facilitators here in the Bahamas and at the Royal Bahamas Police Force. She will be checking me in on any missteps and any incorrections and questions that I would have and cannot answer. I would definitely refer to your president, who is a DV certified facilitator here in the Bahamas as well. Also, at this time, just let me take this time out to recognize many of my friends from across the Caribbean and the Bahamas who have joined us here on this forum to actually chime in and listen in. And notably, I would like to actually just welcome my senior vice president, who's a consultant in clinical services, and she hails from the beautiful country of Barbados, Alison Gotip, and she should be on this call as well. She's she's our senior vice president for the National Lead Institute and one of our trainers as well. So it's indeed a pleasure, a privilege, and a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And as we say in our fraternity, the cause speeds on its way. So let me get started with the information. What I will do is I will share the information and I will leave at least considerable amount of time for us to have a dialogue, a conversation, because this is a very important subject matter. Actually, if you look across the Caribbean, this is actually what is contributing to a lot of violence through our Caribbean countries and mainly here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And this evening, my topic is breaking the cycle, and I'm yours truly, Troy Clarke. And the other component of my message is the hidden link between substance use and domestic violence in our communities. The hidden link between substance use and domestic violence in our communities. Domestic violence and substance use, they are interrelated, they are interlinked issues which affects many of our communities throughout not only the Bahamas, the islands of the Bahamas, but the region and for the greater part, the entire world. It's important for us to understand, it's very important for us to understand the connection between prevention and effective critical intervention. So I'm not just going to talk to you about domestic violence and the link between substance use disorder and domestic violence. I will also give you some of my solutions as a professional in the field who have had considerable amount of time working as a consultant with Clarke I in one of the most recent consultancy in violence against women. And like one of our former prime minister used to say, women. I like to say women, pronouncing the W like a V. Yeah, okay. But anyway, violence against women, girls, and boys. And so we have to understand that there is a connection that is very critical for prevention and effective intervention. Also, we'll talk about the issues which are rooted. We know that violence, DV, and I will sometimes refer to it as domestic violence or DV. Both issues, substance use and DV, are rooted in a complex behavioral, psychological, and societal factors. So let's look at defining domestic violence. And before I would share, can somebody give me their take on what they feel or they think domestic violence is all about? Not all at once. I don't want you to speak all at once. One at a time. Open your mic and tell me what you think domestic violence is. Don't allow the silence to become deafening for me. Thank you.
If I would take a little chop at it, I would say domestic violence is any type of, whether it be physical, whether it be verbal, abuse towards another person.
Okay, good. So let's see what definition, because what I would have done was I would have done my research for you so that we can have an appreciation and understanding on the subject matter. So let's define domestic violence. So domestic violence is, for this presentation, basically it is defined as abusive behavior. I should have given somebody else co-host so that they can let these folks in. But for this presentation, domestic violence is defined as abusive behavior in any relationship that is used to gain or maintain power and control over a current or former intimate partner or family or household member. That includes individuals who are or were married, in a domestic partnership, or in a romantic or dating relationship. Because back a lot of things that happens outside of the home, we didn't consider as domestic violence as well. So individuals who have or have had a child in common have been intimately involved in some kind of way. Also, individuals who are related by blood adoption, or legal custody, or reside in the same home. Continue. Domestic violence can include physical, sexual, emotional, economic, or psychological actions or threats of actions that are intended to control or harm another person. Two key factors, two key words that comes up in this definition. One is control. The other is harm. Control and harm. I want you to remember those two words, control and harm. This includes any behavior that intimidate, manipulate, isolate, terrorize, frighten, blame, hurt, injure, or wound someone. Additional forms of violence basically that may occur with domestic violence include, but are not limited to what I'm sharing with you here tonight: verbal threats, act of intimidations, property damage, animal cruelty, also elder cruelty to elders in the home, elder abuse, child abuse, and stalking. Let's look at some types of abuse. And, in domestic violence, there are different types of abuse that are generated in the confines of domestic violence. We have economic abuse. That's where attempting to make an individual financially dependent, where you have the boyfriend, the husband, or even the wife, because, and I will share some myth, because we think domestic violence only happens to one gender, which is the female gender, and don't think it happens to the male gender. But economic abuse, that's when the male or any spouse, any partner within that relationship controls the money, controls the purse, and keep the other party from actually having access to that funding. Then you have emotional abuse. Emotional abuse, it actually undermines someone's sense of self-worth. That's when you degrade an individual. A wife can, or a partner can emasculate the male man, the spouse, the male spouse in the relationship by denigration, criticism, name calling. Then you have the physical abuse of domestic violence. Any intentional and unwanted act done toward a victim's body. Physical abuse can comprise a wide range of behaviors, which includes aggressive, offensive, or unthreatened actions. Then you have psychological abuse, the employment of verbal, and in many instances, it comes from the female gender to the male, and most of the physical side comes from the male to the female gender when it talks about abuse. And so that's psychological abuse, when you employ emotional, mental acts rather than or in concert with physical attacks. So you could have a concert of abuse. You could have physical, you have psychological, you have financial, you could have the entire realm of abuse that is perpetrated on the other party. Then you have sexual abuse, unwanted sexual abuse done toward an individual, carried out with any body parts or object to which the victim does not consent to engage in, that the offender commits without regard for the victim's wants or rights. And we'll get into some controversial subject matter later on in this presentation, but I just want to stick it here. In our Caribbean countries, sexual abuse is rampant, is high. And the amount that are reported is high. In St. Lucia, in the Bahamas, Trinidad, Jamaica, Barbados, it is high. And I believe that once we inform the families, the communities, the schools, the church, then what happens is that we can cut down on the abuses that is happening. And that is why this forum is being taken place right now at an important time, important juncture. and especially how this is summertime too, you can find a lot of sexual abuse occurring with our vulnerable population, our children who are home from the educational system. And so we have to be mindful, we have to be aware of what is going on so that it will not continue. Then we have to remember that these behaviors could include forcing the victim into sexual acts, photographing or film the victim in sexual acts without their consent, refusing to use prophylactic measures and any other non-consensual sexual behaviors. Let's look at, I shared with you the types of abuses. Now, let me give you some examples of clients not using their real names who would have had the same type of issue that I would have shared in many of our classes. This is Mariana's story. I got married at the age of 18 and believed our lives would be perfect. When my ex-partner got his way, he was when my ex-partner got his way, he was wonderful. When he didn't, he would blame me whether it was my fault or not. If I got upset or challenged him, he would say I was weak and didn't know what I was doing. I started to find food I thought I had brought home disappearing, and he would say I was stupid. I would arrive at a pre-book appointment at the hairdresser and find it was canceled. I missed school evenings because the dates I was told were incorrect. I thought I was losing my memory or my sanity. He used to try to exclude me when we attended gatherings, whispering to tell me to leave because I wasn't welcome. If I got upset, he would make it look like I had mental health issues and I was being oversensitive. He eventually stopped me from seeing my friends and family, telling me that I only needed him in my life, and they all thought I was stupid. I eventually became too afraid to do anything or make any decisions because I knew they'd be wrong and I would be threatened. Let's look at another client story. This one was psychological abuse, an example of psychological abuse. Physical abuse. Let's look at Jenny's story. When I met Ted, everything seemed perfect. I got pregnant soon after and was so excited to be expecting our first child. I thought he would be too. When I told Ted the happy news, everything changed. He held me down and shouted at me, and when I struggled to get loose, he hit me. Not long after, Ted locked me in our shed for one whole night without any food. One day, he returned home from work and told me that if I didn't terminate the pregnancy, he would kill me and the child. I decided to run to my friend's house, but Ted found my packed suitcase and pushed me down the stairs, injuring me badly, and worst of all, losing my baby. When I was in the hospital, I decided to tell my story to the nurse. I felt powerless, lost, and scared, but the nurse helped me plan to leave. Let's look at emotional abuse. Jane's story. My partner was very insecure about past relationships and became jealous of anyone he thought might be a threat. At the beginning, it seemed almost charming, like he wanted to be number one in my world. Oh, you know how men can be, right? But over time, it became more and more frightening. Whenever I went out, Max would want to know why, where'd I go, and exactly who'd be there. If I came home later, then I said he'd accuse me of having an affair. If he's been drinking, he'll call me all kind of explicit whore and other stuff. He would shout, swear up at me. It started happening multiple times a week. Next day, he was always sorry and felt so bad he'd never do it again. One time, he stopped me from talking with my friends freely. He would throw and break things afterwards if I did. Yeah, he would break things afterward if I did tell other friends. He'd drive the car at high speed with me in it, knowing I hated it and was petrified. I started to believe that Mark's behavior was my fault. Like he said, my self-esteem was wrecked, and I spent most days crying. Financial abuse, Halma's story. At the start, I was so happy with Kala. He appeared very genuine and caring and really charming. But then our relationship began to change. He started to tell me that because of my, I always get a problem with this word, dyspraxia. I shouldn't be in charge of finances. We met at university. I was a full-time student, but worked where I could. He didn't, and because he was an international student, he said he couldn't work or access any grants or benefits, but he would frequently take money from me. He made me feel guilty if I refused to buy him stuff. He even asked for designer gifts. I trusted him, and he used this to get access to all my bank cards and details. It even turned out later he'd taken out a loan in my name. I started getting suspicious when letters arrived about repayments that I could not afford. I felt worthless and so guilty for letting him into my life in the first place, like it was my fault. Finally, I confided in some friends, Ari and Nadia, who suggested finishing the toxic relationship with Carla and reporting the bank fraud to the police. With their help and support, I was able to leave Carla, get financial support, rebuild my confidence and my life. It is so sad when we hear stories of this magnitude. This should never, ever happen to anyone. Sexual abuse. One of the most heinous abuses one can suffer, a violation of one personal space, their body, their temple. I experienced years of sexual abuse during my long-term relationship with my ex-partner. After I gave birth, I told him I didn't feel comfortable having sex as I was in a lot of pain, but he forced me to sleep with him daily when he arrived home from work, drunk and demanding. I had no money as my ex-partner controlled all of the finances. He told me if I wanted to buy basic essentials, I would have to have sex in return. I began to feel worthless. To make matters worse, he attended all my medical appointments so that I would not have a chance to disclose anything. The only time I spent out of the house was a short walk to take my children to school. At family gatherings, he acted the part of a devoted husband and father. I eventually fled with the help of the police and a domestic abuse charity. I spent 3 months in a refuge before moving to a rented house. The police prosecuted my ex, pleaded guilty to rape, and was sent to. I was not aware that domestic abuse included sexual abuse. And that is so, so true in many relationships, especially marital ones. Folks don't think that sexual abuse can happen. Remember the 2 words I brought up earlier? And no, those loans are not for that. The two words, control or harm, control, harm, and I like to put in a third word there, power. Control, harm, and power. That is what it's all about when you hear about these abusive stories. So let's look at relevant laws in the Bahamas and the Caribbean. The Bahamas, as it relates to domestic violence, is covered under the Sexual Offense and Domestic Violence Act of 1991. Domestic Violence Protection Orders Act 2007. This act repeals Part 2 of the Sexual Offenses and Domestic Act 1991, which had provisions governing domestic violence. The law governing domestic violence in the Bahamas is the Domestic Violence Protection Orders Act 2007. The act repeals Part 2 of the Sexual Offenses and Domestic Violence Act 1991, which had provisions governing domestic violence. All matters concerned with domestic violence are now governed by the Domestic Violence Protection Orders Act 2007. This act expressly prohibits domestic violence and harassment. It creates a wide range of speedy and effective remedies which are aimed at reducing the incidence of and preventing domestic violence. Within the English-speaking Caribbean, there have been substantial improvements in the laws governing gender-based violence. All of the English-speaking countries in the Caribbean have enacted domestic violence legislation. Beginning in the 1990s, there was what has been referred to as first-generation legislation. For example, the Sexual Offenses and Domestic Act 1991 of the Bahamas and the Domestic Violence Protection Orders Act 1992 of Barbados. However, these acts provide no definition of domestic violence, and the scope of persons who could seek relief were very limited. Following was the Clarke I model legislation on domestic violence in 1997, which has been very influential in the development of domestic violence legislation across the region. The model does not provide a definition for domestic violence. It allows for the making of protection orders, occupation orders, and tenancy orders. There were then second-generation domestic violence legislation. For example, Trinidad and Tobago Domestic Violence Act 1999, Belize Domestic Violence Act 2007, Bermuda Domestic Violence Protection Orders Act 1997, and the Bahamas Domestic Violence Protection Orders Act 2007, which have improved upon the Clarke I model legislation by providing a definition of domestic violence and by expanding the range of persons who can seek relief. UN Women Caribbean GBV Law Portal. Power and control we'll explain. Physical and sexual acts or threats to commit. Physical and sexual acts or threats to commit them are the most apparent forms of domestic violence. And I'll explain more as we go into the power and control wheel. Regular use of other abusive behaviors by the batterer, when it reinforced by one or more acts of physical violence, make up a larger system of abuse. Although physical assaults may occur only once or occasionally, they instill threat of future violent attacks and allow the abuser to take control of the victim's life and circumstances. The power and control diagram is a particularly helpful tool in understanding the overall pattern of abusive and violent behaviors, which are used by batterer to establish and maintain control over his partner. Very often, one or more violent incidents are accompanied by an array of these other types of abuses. They are less easily identified, yet firmly establish a pattern of intimidation and control in the relationship. It's all about control, power and control. So let's look at the power and control wheel. Your physical violence, your physical, sexual violence, using of intimidation, emotional abuse, using isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming. And that's where gaslighting comes into play as well in the relationship. They use children as well as a power. For example, husbands and wives, any party, to have their own way, use children, keep the children away from the other partner, or even let's look at using male privilege, treating the female as though she's lesser than, as though she's a servant, as though she's a slave, being the one to define what a man is and what a woman is, or what a man's role is and what a woman's role is. And of course, economic abuse, keeping funds from one another, using coercion and threats, threatening to leave the individual if they don't do X, Y, Z, or making her do illegal stuff. And so what is happening today, and when I say today, in this current atmosphere, when you have the trafficking of persons, you even have partners, mates, who pimp off their partner to be mules, to carry drugs across country lines. Coercion and threats, making and carrying out threats to do something, or you're going to hurt the person, threatening to leave, or, sometimes, what, if you don't do X, Y, Z, I'm going to kill myself. And then they go to the police, and we have a lot of police officers on this call. I saw some in the recent DV certification course that we began in the Northern Bahamas, Grand Bahama, on this call as well. Persons would commit offense to their partner. One would report it, the other will come behind and ask their mate to drop it, because they'll be the goody two-shoe, things are going good. They become the A1 lover, they become the provider, be nice guy, everything. Then I said this about making the other person do illegal stuff. And you have also, when you hear these women are part of these operations where the male did the shooting and the female lure the other unsuspecting person into a certain area, a lot of times when the investigation is done, you will find out that the female was involved in a domestic violence for quite a long time. And so it's a vicious cycle she got caught up in and ended up committing heinous offenses. Just like recently, one of my squad mates in the reserve who was killed just the other day, you had a female involved. Not saying that she was a part of a domestic violence situation, just saying things like that do happen. Then you have intimidation, making other person afraid because you're a man, you using your power, you using your strength, you smashing things, throwing things against the wall, destroying their property, abusing their pets, and displaying weapons. And like I shared to the class in New Providence and in Grand Bahama, the story where this lady would have met this young man and, he had guns in the glove compartment, he had guns underneath his pillow when they sleep at night. He had guns all around the house. He tried to convince her because he was paranoid in the sense that how he used to be abused. But what happened was that the guns was really there to intimidate his newly wedded wife. You have emotional abuse, putting the other person down, calling their names, making the other person think they're crazy, playing mind games, humiliating that person. And then you have isolation, where partners would keep their other partners. Oh, you don't have to go around your family. I just want you to myself. Why do you have to keep friends? Why do you have to hang out? Limited outside involvement used to be a part of Kiwanis. Now you don't see the member come back to Kiwanis club anymore. And using jealousy to justify. And men famous for that. I'm a jealous man. Why you want to do this to me? And stuff like that. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. Making light of the abuse. Oh, that no broken bone was on you. Or saying, hey, the abuse didn't happen. That's not a pattern. I just was angry. I just was drunk one night. Shifting responsibility. See, you caused me to do this. Shifting responsibility. And also, like I stated earlier, using the children, making the other person feel guilty because of the children. Since this child came into the relationship, you don't have more time for me. It's all about the child, the child, the child. And then, or using the children to relay message. And then using visitation to harass the other person. And I know some of you could talk about this. Oh, I want to see my child. Or if two partners aren't together, I want to see my child. But all the time, I want to speak to the woman of my child, not necessarily the child. And say, okay, I'll give you this money for the child if you just have some sex with me. And that's how they use the child. Or, you know what, I'll go to social services, you're unemployed. I'll take the children away. See, I have a good job, a good home, good house. But they don't realize I have a messed up mind. Like I said, male privilege. If the abuser is a male and the victim is female in this sense, treating her like a servant, making all the big decisions. And in a relationship, it should be partnership, equal. Acting like the master of the castle. Oh, I'm the king of this castle, but forgetting that she's supposed to be equally the queen of the castle as well. Being the one to define men's and women's role. Then you have economic abuse, as I shared earlier, making them ask for money. Not letting the other person know about or have access to funds that were saved for the family. So let's look at the cycle of abuse. First, there's tension. The abuser creates tension, and the survivor's stress builds. Then you have the incident where the abuser lashes out, whether through verbal, sexual abuse, physical, and they use abusive tactics to actually dominate the person who's being abused. Then you move into reconciliation. The abuser makes excuses or attempts to apologize for the incident. And that's in the reconciliation component, psychopath. That's where the gaslighting start happen. You know what? Nothing really happened. I just was playing. And look here, man, we was only wrestling. Then it goes on to the calm section. Things seem peaceful. Maybe even better than before. You see, our relationship is improving. But often this doesn't last before the cycle starts over. And I want you to note that the cycle of abuse was originally created by psychologist Lenore Walker. The cycle does not represent all cases of domestic violence. So all cases of domestic violence doesn't necessarily go through this whole pattern. It can skip one, or it could just be in one or two areas of the abuse. Now let's look at factors contributing to domestic violence. Let me pause right here and ask my audience, my listening audience, what are some of the factors that you think are contributing to domestic violence? What are some of the factors? I want us to, just for 2-3 minutes, to discuss this. What are some of the factors?
People with low self-esteem,
Okay.
or they were being abused when they were younger and they bring it into their adult life.
Okay, yes. Anyone else? Let's go. We have 32%.
Well, I would say domestic violence could stem off from women who possibly they love money and they get themselves in a situation with a male, who use that money against them. He weaponized the money.
When you say they weaponize the money, explain that a little more for me.
I think difficulties in communicating with partners, lack of communication.
Okay, Troy, when I would say weaponize the money, I'm referring to if he as a male may have advertised himself as a person who has money, may have attracted a female to him. Now, he uses this money as a way to try to keep her. She gets attached to the money in a nutshell. And he probably, may beat her, may use verbal abuse. And because she doesn't want to let this money go, she is subject to abuse.
Okay, good. And I heard somebody else say communication. And when you speak about communication, what exactly you're speaking to?
Like when you said you had the situation, one of the stories stated well. Every time she went to family functions, he was always there, or trust. But if you don't have communication between you and your partners and understanding, it could cause a lot. That's what I meant.
Okay, and I want us to understand there's a difference between causation and correlation. Okay, and I will explain that further as I go into the presentation.
I think somebody has something else to add to the.
Go ahead.
I think a lot of people, domestic violence also stems from how persons are raised. Sometimes they see their mother or father in the situation, and because they don't come out of the situation, they think that's normal. So they go about and they mimic that in their adult lives.
Right. And we'll talk a little about culture. And because if you grow up in an environment that is normal for the man to beat the woman, and you see that as a child, being male or female, and you become an adult and have your own partner, then you think that is normal. And when your mate or spouse or whoever or the person in that environment goes against you or say hit you on the wrist for that, you have a problem. And it happens a lot. Okay, let's move on now. So factors contributing to domestic violence. There are many factors can increase or decrease the likelihood of someone experiencing or perpetrating violence. You have risk factors, and that's what we talk about risk, and we talk about protective factors. Risk factors that are more likely contributing factors that domestic violence will happen, and protective factors are these strengths that contribute to the environment or the individual that can mitigate against the risk factors. So risk factors increase the risk of experiencing or perpetrating violence, and protective factors can reduce the risk. So preventing domestic violence, or I would use IPV, intimate partner violence, requires understanding and addressing risks and protective factors. And like I said, and I will share some of the risk factors and I'll share some of the protective factors. and show how they are mitigated against each other so that domestic violence would happen. Not because there are risk factors that are involved, meaning, okay, that domestic violence will happen. So let's look at risk factors for perpetration. Individual risk factors. Individual have low self-esteem, low education or income, young age, aggressive or delinquent behavior as a youth, heavy alcohol and drug use, depression and suicide attempts, anger and hostility, lack of nonviolent or social problem-solving skills, antisocial personality traits, and conduct problems of conduct disorder. Then you have poor behavioral control and impulsivity, traits associated with borderline personality disorder. You have a history of physical abuse, having few friends, economic stress, and that aligns with poverty too, belief in strict gender roles, male dominance, aggression in relationships, desire for power and control in the relationship, hostility towards women. All of these, or you have a history of physical and emotional abuse in childhood. All of these are risk factors perpetrating in a relationship. Understand that relationship conflicts, including jealousy, possessiveness, tension, divorce or separation, dominance and control of the relationship by one partner over the other. And you see control coming up again and again. Family experiencing economic stress, unhealthy family relationships and interactions, association with antisocial and aggressive peers, parents with less than high school education, witnessing violence between parents as a child, history of experiencing poor parenting as a child, history of experiencing physical discipline as a child. These were relationship. Earlier we talked about individuals. We talked about relationships. So let's now look at some community, because there are actually community risk factors involved. Communities with high rates of poverty and limited educational and economic opportunities. So what this is saying, based on the CDC study, Center for Disease Control in the US, what it shows is that in communities where there are projects as such, there's a higher risk factor for domestic violence to be perpetrated, because you have the elements of control, power, and then harm. I'm not saying that in the higher socioeconomic communities, it doesn't happen. They just have a way of hiding it. But the frequency, the research have gathered that is greater in the other, because the persons who in the higher economic, in socioeconomic, who have the education, who have that, they will tolerate it for such a period of time and then leave. Communities with high unemployment rates, communities with high rates of violence and crime. So let's look at the high rates of violence and crime in our inner city: Camp Road, Baintown, Montel Heights. It shifts around. This is in New Providence for those of you who are not from the Bahamas. Communities where neighbors don't know or look out for each other. And there's low community involvement among residents. And I say that in Freeport because you ask any, and I know some of the police officers are on this call from Freeport who are part of the training as well. They can tell you that a lot of the violent crimes that are occurring, there's a lot of domestic violence underlying with those crimes. And Freeport, per se, I always like to say, I live in Freeport. And so hopefully y'all don't crucify me who on the call from Freeport. I'm from Nassau, yes, but I live in Freeport. I always call Freeport a glorified family island. It has the infrastructure but it doesn't have the community togetherness or knit. People live apart. And when that happens, that's isolation. And so neighbors don't know each other. And so violence, domestic violence is high. Communities with easy access to drugs and alcohol. So you see bars around the place. Every corner has a bar in New Providence, basically, in inner cities. So these are what we call community risk factors, weak community sanctions against intimate partner violence, willingness of neighbors to intervene in situations, neighbors aren't going to intervene. Let's look at societal risk factors. And when we talk about societal risk factors, it's different from the community. When we talk about the community, we're talking about you have different communities within the greater society is more micro than macro. So you have in the societal risk factors, you have traditional gender norms and gender inequality. That is the idea that women should stay at home. I know a lot of women wish you could stay at home and husband pay all the bills and you just take care of the children. But in this day and time, it doesn't happen. But the idea that women should stay at home, not enter the workforce and be submissive. Men should support the family and make the decisions. And we fail to understand that when we talk about submissiveness, and for those of you who subscribe to the Christian faith, submissiveness is a two-way. Submit one to the other, not just the woman submissive to the man, but man submissive to the woman. So it goes both ways. Then you have cultural norms that support aggression towards others. And somebody said, and that's cultural norms because you have a lot of subcultures within our society, within our communities, that they come from cultures where basically, you know what? Women do wrong, you get beaten. I remember when I was in university in Raleigh, North Carolina, during that era in the 1990s, mid 1990s, late 1990s, they still had the laws on the book where a man can take a woman and beat her on the on the court steps and nothing happens to him. And that law still was on the books. You could Google it and find out. Societal income inequality. Wealth, health, weak health, education, economic, social policies or laws. And when you see your society, government doesn't equip society with proper economic, proper social policies, proper health, infrastructure and stuff like that, and it's weak, it's a breeding factor for what we call risk for domestic violence for the general society. So let's look at some protective factors for perpetrating. Relationship protective factors, strong social support networks, and stable positive relationships with others. Community protective factors, neighborhood collective efficacy, meaning residents feel connected to each other and are involved in the community. You have coordination of resources and services among community agencies. Then you have communities with access to safe, stable housing. That's why housing is very, very important. Communities with access to medical care and mental health services. And then you have communities with access to economic and financial help. You don't have to go to the number boys. You don't have to go to the number houses to play your numbers and stuff like that. Let's look at some myth about domestic violence so that we know what are some of the myths that are perpetrated. Myth number one, domestic violence does not affect many people. That's a myth. It is believed that domestic violence is the most common but least reported crime globally. Myth number two, domestic violence is only physical abuse. And I showed you that is not the case. And we saw where you have emotional and other types of abuse. Myth number three, domestic abuse is only a momentary loss of temper. So, wife come home tired, husband didn't have the house straightened up, she take out grits and throw it on him. That ain't just that one time. It's usually a combination of things over a period of time. It is just the opposite. The abuser makes a decision to abuse. It is an ongoing behavior to enforce control through fear. Domestic violence only happens in poor families. And as I said it before, in the higher socioeconomic families, it happens too. Domestic violence is just an occasional slap or punch that is not serious. Victims are seriously injured, folks. Over 30% of women seeking care in emergency rooms are victims of domestic violence. When I did my undergrad in social work in the Bahamas, I did my internship at Silence Rehabilitation Center. Then when I worked as a welfare officer at the then Emergencies Prison, what I discovered when I was working inside the female component of female prison, back then, majority of women who were sentenced for murder, when you look at their social, their history, biosocial history, you'll find out that 90% of those women were victims of domestic violence in a domestic violence relationship and subsequently end up murdering their spouse, their partner. Another myth, drinking or drug abuse causes domestic violence. Some abusers use it as an excuse for their violent behaviors. Oh, I was drunk, so I didn't know what I was doing. I was drunk and I didn't know what I was doing. One does not cause the other. Myth number 7, if the abuser is truly sorry and promises to reform, the abuse will stop. That's a myth. That's a myth. Remorse and begging for forgiveness are manipulative. And my senior vice president who is studying narcissism right now, she could tell you, when persons have narcissistic tendencies and they manipulate, they can be very abusive. And it doesn't only have to be physical, emotional. And women good at that. So in that area of abuse. Myth number 8, the victim can always walk away from the relationship. And you say, why you don't leave? Why you don't leave? But you got to understand the cycle. Victims believe that do not have a safe place to go. And there aren't safe homes. Thank God the Royal Bahamas Police Force just opened up a safe home on the island, in the capital several months ago. We are looking to do the same here on the island of Grand Bahama. And when one of the officers say, no, that's going to be too taxing on the officers, I said, no, it doesn't have to be taxing on the officers. What happens is that you partner with NGOs to make it happen. The police don't have the man-hours. The police just have the oversight. And you employ an NGO to run the facility of the house. Myth number 9, if the violent episode do not happen that often, the situation is not that serious. It's a myth. Myth number 10, victims of the types of personalities that seek out and encourage abuse. No, it's not only just the type of personalities. That's a myth. There are no determined personality traits that describe a victim. It is the abuser that is responsible for the abuse decision. The prevalence, the following statistics are taken from the CDC, National IP Interpartner and Sexual Violence Survey, and the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence State Report, and underscores the need for proactive law. Note that intimate partner violence is defined as physical violence, sexual violence, stalking, and psychological aggression, including coercive acts by a current or a former intimate partner. Both terms are often used interchangeably. However, there are some differences. Domestic violence can occur between a parent or child, siblings, or even roommates. Intimate partner violence can only occur between romantic partners who may or may not be living together in the same household. Most victims of DV or IPV are female. However, we must be cognizant of the fact that there are also some male victims, and stereotyping that, oh, you soft, you let a woman hit you. So the underreporting of male, and then males might not come to the station for psychological or financial or when they're emasculated. Okay, so those type of abuse you wouldn't find being reported. Look at more statistics. 20 people per minute are victim of physical violence by an intimate partner in the United States. This equals over 10 million women, men and women each year. And you know what they say? When the United States sneeze, we catch the cold. These numbers are even higher for some sexual minorities. 44% of lesbian women, 61% of bisexual women, and 37% of bisexual men experience intimate partner violence. You have Black, non-Hispanic, multiracial, non-Hispanic men and women are more likely to experience rape, physical violence, or stalking by intimate partner than white non-Hispanic men and women. And we could talk about this as a generational disease of violence that you can trace this back. Some theorists trace this back all the way to slavery. An IDB study on gender-based violence in the Bahamas in 2024, just last year, a significant gender-based violence study found that 1 in 4 women in the Bahamas had suffered physical or sexual violence in their life, with survivors lamenting the challenges with accessing healthcare, law enforcement, and social services in the country. That's 1,260 women interviewed between the ages of 18 and 64. 1 in 4 women reported that they either received physical violence or sexual violence within their lifetime. The study also continued that 272 women who reported physical violence, almost 65% said the violence was severe. Regarding sexual violence, 6.6% of women reported they were forced to perform degrading or humiliating acts in their lifetime. Common factors associated with women suffering abuse in relationships include getting financial support from a man, being unable to rely on family members, and getting sexual abuse as a child. This is an indictment upon us as a people. And see, I'm not talking about the other Caribbean countries on how we look. I'm talking about us here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And this, it goes on. And I'm not going to continue to read the study, but the study conclusion gave the survey noted that 53% of women never leave their abuser. Over 1 in 10 stayed because they had nowhere to go or relied on their partner financially. And I know a lot of men on this thing. And I'm glad I'm a man who's speaking. I'm a male man. I'm going to say I'm a male man. I'm a man. So, softness here. And I have no problem if somebody has a different, described a different type of lifestyle. I respect that. But what I'm saying, we as men, we have to get it together. Why do women stay? Because of the dynamics and trauma involved. Victims may have reasons why they are reluctant to leave or may return to abusive relationships. Love or emotional attachment to the perpetrator. Promises that the abuse will end. Financial dependence on the perpetrator. Issues involving children, including fears for their safety or loss of custody or of kidnapping or any combination thereof. Why do women stay? Guilt. Feelings that they did something to cause the abuse, or if I did act this way, I know Troy would not have struck me, or Troy would not have hit me, or he would not have degraded me. No. Fear that leaving would not help to escape from the perpetrator's control. fear of increased stalking behaviors, fear of increased physical harm to self, children, family, friends, and pets if attempts to leave are made, suicidal and homicidal threats made by the perpetrator, previous negative experience with the criminal justice system. That's why we have decided to certify police officers in the area of domestic violence. And I'm glad the president of this club, who's hosting this event, this timely discussion, is one of the certified facilitators. You have lack of support, fear of being alone, fear of losing family and friends, religious and or cultural beliefs. All of these things are reasons why women stay. Now let's look at the role of substance abuse. Research have shown a clear link between drugs and alcohol and domestic violence. Around 40 to 60% of reported domestic violence situations involve alcohol or drug use. One meta-analysis found that individuals with a drug use disorder are 4 and 10 times more likely to perpetrate violence than non-drug users. There are a few potential explanations for these relationships. Drugs and alcohols are both conscious altering substances and can result in behavioral changes such as increased aggression, impaired judgment, and cognitive functioning, and lower inhibition and self-control. All of these can contribute to violent behavior, particularly when paired with other risk factors for domestic violence. Sadly, substance abuse often affects people on both sides of the abuse paradigm. It's not uncommon for survivors, for domestic violence to turn to alcohol for self-medication or self-care to deal with the cope with trauma, to cope with the experience that they would have gone through. Researchers have found that 1/4 to 1/2 of men who commit acts of domestic violence also have substance abuse problems. A recent survey of public child welfare agencies conducted by the National Committee to Prevent Child Abuse found that as many as 80% of child abuse cases are associated with use of alcohol and other drugs. Remember, child abuse is domestic violence as well. Research also indicates that women who abuse alcohol and other drugs are more likely to become victims of domestic violence. And that victims of domestic violence are more likely to receive prescriptions for and become dependent on tranquilizers, sedatives, stimulants, and painkillers, and are more likely to abuse alcohol. And you'll find alcohol abuse and alcohol usage rampant in uniform branches. And when we talk about uniform branches, that's the police, the prison, the defense force, because they are high stress jobs in many instances. And you'll find that a lot high DV matters happen. And several police officers, even in our training, would have shared what happened to them in several instances. So about 40% of children from violent homes believe that their fathers had a drinking problem. Childhood physical abuse is associated with later substance abuse by youth. 50% of batterers are believed to have addiction problems. Substance abuse by one parent increases the likelihood that substance abusing parent will be unable to protect their children in an abusive situation. And also a study conducted by the Department of Justice of murder in families found that more than half of defendants accused of murdering their spouses, as well as almost half of the victims, had been drinking alcohol at the time of the incidents. So you see the connection between substance abuse and family violence. And teachers even have reported the need for protective services 3 times more often for children who are being raised by someone with an addiction than for other children. You have alcoholic or women who suffer from alcohol use are more likely to report a history of childhood physical and emotional abuse. Women who are in recovery are likely to have a history of violent trauma and are at high risk of being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So I could give you, the list goes on between the link between substance abuse and domestic violence. Though experts agree there's a connection between the two behaviors, its precise nature remains unclear. One researcher writes, probably the largest contributing factor to domestic violence is alcohol. And from recent police reports in DV situation, they have reported we have a high percentage that in those matters, alcohol consumption was utilized by the aggressor. All major theories point to the excessive use of alcohol as a key element in the dynamics of wife beating. However, it is not clear whether a man is violent because he is drunk or whether he drinks to reduce his inhibitions against his violent behavior. Within this theoretical framework, the societal view of substance abusers are morally weak and controlled by alcohol or other drugs actually serves some batterers. Rather than taking responsibility for their actions, they can blame the violent acts on substances which they are abusing. Although drugs or alcohol may indeed be a trigger for violence, the belief that the violence will stop once drinking or drug use stops is usually not borne out. It's a myth. The use of alcohol or other drugs may increase the likelihood of the batterer will commit an act of domestic violence because it reduces inhibitions and distort perceptions, because alcohol is often an excuse for violence, and because both alcohol abuse and domestic violence tend to follow parallel escalating patterns. But it does not fully explain the behavior. So the jury still is out. Then you have the societal context. And I want to come down here. Domestic violence poses numerous challenges, issues that need to be addressed. The psychological factors such as gender role beliefs, mental health issues, and substance abuse can affect the reporting. Insufficient resources, victim blame, and weak sentencing guidelines, and lack of consistency. The use of digital and smart technology provides opportunities in addressing domestic violence, but ethical challenges and responsibility usage need to be considered. Screening for domestic violence against women is hindered. Barriers related to employees, barriers related with client and prevailing culture and society. And then you have domestic abuse in older population, rural locations like in family islands. A lot of that happen on family islands, and it goes underreported, or they try to get them, oh, y'all stop from disturbing the peace. Then we have the role of law enforcement. Law enforcement officers can be agents of change. And that's why we have the domestic violence training certification going, second cohort going on in the Northern Bahamas. A victim initial contact with law enforcement rarely happens after the first or even the second domestic incident. Often the legal system becomes involved only after you have a pattern of abuse, and agencies establish priorities and written policies will be reflected in the quality of response given to victims of domestic violence. So basically, all is the same. Law enforcement, they are the gatekeepers. It's important to have them train and understand how they should respond to the victims of domestic violence. And there's characteristics of the victim behavior: passivity, denial, anger, laughing, lack of emotion, and that's the victim fear. And so law enforcement, these are the things that law enforcement must know. Important to note, however, under no circumstance should officers compromise their response to any incident or any victim based on personal judgments or frustration. And so that's why collaboration and training is important for law enforcement, prosecutors, court administrators, corrections, parole, probation, advocacy organizations, social service agencies, clergy, schools, government, animal and welfare organizations, business and employers. Coming to the end, solutions and interventions. There need to be an integrated treatment for SUD and DV survivors. Public awareness campaigns and education is important. Access to shelters, safe housing, and mental health services. Partnerships with faith-based and other civic organizations such as Kiwanis and other organizations, and you guys are doing an awesome job bringing an awareness to the greater community. My final thoughts. Substance use and domestic violence are deeply intertwined. We must respond with compassion. We must be empathetic. And like I told my students, there's a difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy is where you put your feet in somebody else's shoes. Compassion is where you go a step further and you provide relief. You are doing something about this situation. We have to coordinate and we have to commit as an organization. Just how the Kiwanis brought me in from the National Lead Institute, a non-governmental, non-profit organization, to get the information out. Then we got to share with others. Everyone has a role to play, from law enforcement to local leaders such as yourself. Together, we can break the cycle and build safer, more resilient communities. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. The floor is open for questions, if we have any time, Madam President.
Yes, we do. I have a comment in the chat. There was a comment stating that we don't talk about persons who have legal status and have full control of their spouse papers, and they gain control through that. How do you speak on that?
Basically, I touch a little when I talk about trafficking of persons. You have also, that's a vulnerable community where you have Jamaicans who are residing here in the Bahamas and they married a Bahamian, or Haitians who are residing in the Bahamas, they married a Bahamian and they didn't get their other status sorted out. And as a Bahamian, you decide to keep their papers and you lord that over them and don't get them straight, because what happened is that you want to have control, you want to have power, and if harm is involved, then the cycle continues.
Okay, I'm opening the floor for about 10 minutes. Anybody have any questions, comments, anything that they want to share before we end our meeting tonight? The floor is now open.
Good night, all. I hope I didn't miss this part, but did we talk about some persons who feel like if they don't get abuse, be it physical or verbal, that the person doesn't love them anymore, or they don't feel less loved by not being treated that way?
Most definitely. There is a terminology, and I keep on forgetting that terminology in my class. My students would have reminded me of that, but there is a thought process by the victim, and that is because of the low self-esteem that the individual would have had, and as I would have shared some of the risk factors. And so they believe, and because they would have grown up in a culture, and let me just step back. There was a recent survey that was done. I think it was done, I'm not sure if it was done post-COVID or pre-COVID, at the University of the Bahamas, where the majority of respondents stated, and these are young people who stated that it is okay for their mate to hit them if they feel as though they did something wrong. And so those individuals with that mindset, thinking that, hey, my partner loved me, but they only discipline me as though I'm a child, that mindset is also in the community of victims of domestic violence.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Can you speak more about gaslighting, please?
Okay, when I talk about gaslighting, that didn't really happen like that. You to blame, or you blaming the person, or it wasn't that serious. Oh man, why we always have to go down this road? I keep on telling you, I go to work every day and I work so hard and I come home here and you talking foolishness. The continuation of conversation of that magnitude.
Thank you, Mr. Goss.
You would kind of call that where the perpetrator plays victim.
Say again?
You would kind of call that where the perpetrator plays victim.
Yes, most definitely.
You have that a lot.
And anyone else, you could chime in to add to it if you so desire.
Well, it's definitely a form of manipulation where an individual twists the narrative to fit something that places them over the other person. So twisting how things happen, twisting the meaning of things, so that the other person, like was said, is left to feel like it was their fault, or they caused the situation, or they didn't understand it the way that they thought, so that the person who's being gaslit starts to question whether or not they experience what they experience, whether or not reality was really real because of the level of intense manipulation.
Right. And the further that, always remember, gaslighting, that's a form of emotional and psychological abuse. All right. It's a form of emotional and psychological abuse. And you guys, you would have answered it. Denying it ever happened, blaming, shifting the blame and stuff. Go on, any other question?
Yes, Troy, what I wanted to know is there how women would have a safe house to go to, or they have a forum to talk to other women about abuse. There are a lot of men in the Bahamas who may be going through abuse. Is there any support group for that or a safe house?
Well, I'm not aware of any safe house, but I can tell you there is a support group, the Hope and Healing Community Support Group, that is hosted by the National Lead Institute in conjunction with, I just put in a plug in there, Life Community Church. And I know we are a nation of islands. And so you guys might be in New Providence, Eleuthera, Andros, but here on the island of Grand Bahama, every other Thursday, we have Hope and Healing Community Support Group where men can come in and discuss their issue and have the support of other men and also women as well.
And if so, could you explain why men don't voice their position even to the police or report it?
Well, doing research, we have found out that, and that's why we developed the domestic violence training program, because a lot of police officers who are on the front line did not understand and have an appreciation for that, especially for men who would be abused because of the stigma. A man will not come out of his home to say his wife beat him unless something, he got stabbed or hot grits or hot water was thrown upon him. He would not come out and say that, even if there's a physical fight and he got beat up from his wife, because some of these women can beat men, and I don't want to make light of it. In one of the classes, one of the officers say the way to find out if a woman beats a man is ask if she drink Guinness, and if she say yeah, you must run far away from her, because then you're gonna get involved in domestic violence, being a woman beater. So I just wanted to throw that light in. But stigma, shame, and a big strapped-in man, male man, who decide, I'm not gonna go to the police. And like I shared with my class, I remembered myself being abused at one time, and that's how come I got to the crisis center. And I went there for counseling because I vowed that, I ain't a punch, I ain't gonna hit a woman. And in a relationship that I was in, that actually happened to me. And so after I got involved with the crisis center, I decided, you know what, let me become an advocate. And I started out going into the school representing the crisis center on red flags in relationships for young people. Yeah.
Mr. Clarke, I have a next question.
Go ahead.
So I know there are more women than men. This Lauren in Grand Bahama, by the way.
Yeah, I see.
There are more women than men who earn DV situations. But is there a statistics for men, or have you been seeing more men over the years come forth and say that they're being abused or have been abused, like how you just said you were?
Actually, right off the top, in the Bahamas, no, I haven't come across statistics of men being abused. But there are statistics out there. For example, men statistics from the national and DC area, where you had national DC, you have 1 in 7 men, 14% have experienced severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. About 1 in 10 men, and this came basically from the National Domestic Violence Hotline and CDC out of Washington. And so that's the only set of data I would have compiled, and also from the LGBTQ plus inclusion, where you had gay and bisexual men report intimate partner violence at rates basically higher than heterosexual men, often with added barriers to seeking help. In the Bahamas, in New Providence particularly, there was a slew of individuals who were killed by their supposedly lovers. And you had a former professor at the university. He was one of my professors at the university. He was one of those. And then I used to sell handbags for one of my former schoolmates who was murdered by his lover. And all of you would know Hal Taylor, who had bags. Basically, I used to sell handbags for him because I had a store in the marketplace selling handbags. And so he would have been one other person who was murdered by his lover, and pattern of basically him, you would have discovered that there were fights and there were times when things were reported to the police on his behalf. But as it relates to core statistics in the Bahamian, just no, I haven't come across that as but the police definitely will have that from those who. And so in our next class, which would be in July, I will seek to get some data, local data from the domestic violence unit research team to see exactly how prevalent it is here in the Bahamas.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, comments?
If there be any no more comments, questions, or any replies to anything, I would like to welcome Shalise, our protocol, and she would give our vote of thanks for tonight.
Good evening to all.
I'm a bit
It is
there.
You can't say? Pardon me? Can you hear me?
Can hear you.
We can hear
Okay.
you. So
Good evening to all. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to say thank you on behalf of our president, Lakeisha Rogers, and the entire Kiwanis Club of North Andros. We take this time to say thank you first to our sister of Eleuthera for our opening prayer. Thank you to our very own Interchair Club, Ryan McPhee, for the introduction of our speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, what can we say about this powerful, dynamic speaker? What a timely topic on domestic violence. Please let us unmute our mics, and let's give our speaker a rounding round of applause.
Congratulations.
Great job. Excellent
Congratulations. Thank
presentation.
you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Clarke. We say thank you, sir, for all the informative information you would have shared with us, and also for taking time out of your busy schedule to share and to share with us such a timely topic. I mean, I could hear the passion on your voice as you present. And may God continue to bless you and keep you. Thank you again.
Madam President, I must say we do have guests from around the Caribbean on this call as well.
Okay.
Oh, we do. I'm sorry.
Yes, we do. I don't know everyone, but I can see who was here and who was here. We lost a few persons who was on the call. We do have persons from the Caribbean. I see Allison here. I saw her. Hello, Allison. I met you when I was on my training.
Oh, hi. Good night, everyone. Fantastic presentation. And well, it's been a privilege to hear what's happening in terms of domestic violence. And we as a Caribbean region and also the Bahamian region need to ensure that we're educated. And Mr. Clarke has done a fantastic job in highlighting this along with the National Lead Institute. So thank you.
We also have on the call, we have our DPLG, that is our distinguished past Lieutenant Governor Anastasia, also on the call.
Good evening. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And Mr. Clarke, it was an excellent, excellent presentation. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I see we have a lot of police officers as well. Just give us a hey. I see Kim. I see you out there.
Kim.
Let
me see, we have some police officers from Freeport too.
Yes, we have some Freeport officers. I don't know y'all by name. And this is our interclub chair with Eleuthera and Fort Montague. This is something that all of the clubs, we do this so that we could stay connected, stay educated. We don't just stay in one club. We have to come out of our little shell in our box so that persons like you could give us the knowledge of different topics. So this is something that we do in Kiwanis. And persons who are on the call who are not a Kiwanian, if you want to join, we have a club in Freeport and one in Lucaya. Persons who are in Eleuthera, if there's anyone in Eleuthera, we have a club in Eleuthera. As you can see, we have two, in fact. And then we have persons who are on the call from Nassau. Fort Montague is here. You get on the call. The president of Fort Montague and the president from Eleuthera, they both can. And their secretaries are also here, so they could invite you out to their meeting. We have our Kiwanians from North Andros. I am so happy to see all of you here tonight. We have 3 clubs in Eleuthera. My DP Melinda just sent a message. So get involved. I thank you for our guests. We had Miss Monique Pratt. She was on the call from Church of God of Prophecy in Kamsan. We have Lashima Woodside Sawyer. She's here also. So again, I want to thank you. I don't like to call names because I kind of get messed up and miss some people. Troy, if you were here, we probably would have handed you a little gift, but we are thankful and grateful that you came out. And we're now going to have our meeting closed by a word of prayer by the Kiwanis, Kiwanian Tonette from Fort Montague.
Thank you and good evening to all. Just want to say thank you to Mr. Clarke. This was an excellent presentation. Some definitely valuable information that we can all take back. So thank you again. So let us just take a moment in reverence and prayer. Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for gathering us here today in service and in purpose. And we are especially grateful for the thought-provoking message shared on this issue, this important issue of domestic violence, an issue that continues to impact too many lives in our communities and across our region. Lord, we lift up every victim, every survivor, every family that is affected by this struggle. Give them strength, healing, and hope. And we hope that as Kiwanians, we can continue to be a force for good, using our voices and our time and our hearts to stand against violence and support those in need. We want to bless Mr. Clarke, who enlightened us today. And we hope that his words continue to inspire action and bring awareness that leads to real change. And as we leave this meeting, we want to carry the renewed commitment to service and justice. We want to guide our thoughts and our decisions and our actions as we seek to build better communities and a stronger Bahamas for all. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Well, two things. One was the correction. There's 3 clubs in Grand Bahama. The other ones, they are asking if the slides can be shared or the recording can be shared. They want to be able to go back and, I guess, spread the word.
What I will do is I will share the recording to you and you could distribute it.
Okay.
Actually, that's why I asked everybody to sign in.
Registered. I think everybody on the call registered, so you should have their emails.
Right. So what I will do is once I download it, I will share it by either WeTransfer. If the file is too big, I'll do WeTransfer and send it to all of you. Okay? And you can disseminate it and use it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Everyone, Kiwanians and guests, we want to thank you all again. You all have a wonderful evening and enjoy. Be safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening. Take care, Martha.
Good night.
How you been doing in Nassau? You in Nassau, right? Or Martha gone?
No, sorry, Troy. I'm right here. I'm presently in North Andros right now.
North Andros. Okay.
That's where I was transferred. So found Kiwanis Club of North Andros. So
right.
You know, so amazing club.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, man. You know, always a pleasure. So we definitely have to catch up.
Most definitely. Okay.
Thank you, man. Awesome presentation.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Good night.